Now that Ben Johnson is officially a Chicago Bear head coach, what direction should the Raiders go and how quickly should they get there? That plus more on Wednesday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for January 22nd, 2025.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome here, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. We definitely appreciate you, whether you're catching us wherever you find your favorite podcast or if you're checking us out by way of the YouTube page. You know, we appreciate that. The show continues to grow each and every day, and that's because of your support, Raider Nation, and because of the great job my man Ari does behind the scenes, making sure we look good and sound good each and every day on the podcast YouTube page, the Locked On Raiders podcast YouTube page. So shout out to Ari. He does a great job. At Ari Produces on Twitter. You can hit me up as well at your boy Q254. And of course, you want to be a part of the show, you can always hit up the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Your calls and texts. A lot of feedback that we've been receiving, as you can imagine, about what direction the Raiders should go next now that Ben Johnson is officially signed, sealed, and delivered the Chicago Bears head coach. So that'll come up segment number 3 as we close out the show. Segment number 2 will highlight a potential candidate that could be a Raiders head coach, a guy that has talked to the team, a guy who's actually in demand, seems like he's in demand at other locations, including the Jacksonville Jaguars. That's a former Jets head coach and 49ers defensive coordinator, Robert Saleh. We'll do a little bit of a highlight on him coming up in segment number 2. Here in segment number 1, just news and notes of the day, really just trying to get you caught up with all things silver and black, all things on the head coaching search, and even more here on today's show. We'll do that after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. And, of course, I'll tell you more about them later on in the show. And today, Raider Nation, I know I've been talking about them all week. Today is officially the day that my oldest son, Kimani, passed away in 2020, January 22nd. 2020 is when it happened. I mentioned it on Tuesday's show, 4 days before Kobe Bryant passed away and about 5 or 6 days away before I went to Miami for the Super Bowl that year. And again, as I mentioned on Tuesday's show, I thought 2020 was going to be my year, from being in New Orleans to bring in the new year, to being in Miami for the Super Bowl, to being in Las Vegas for the draft. Obviously, those things didn't happen. The draft didn't happen in Vegas because of the pandemic. I was in Miami, but I was sick as a dog all week long. I think that, maybe COVID, I had that before it was actually a real thing, before people knew what that was. That could have been it. I missed a whole week of the podcast. I know a lot of that had to do with the passing of my son. I just, as you can imagine, was not feeling the mood to go ahead and do a podcast and talk more than I already had to talk, which was on my radio show on the daily. So obviously it's just been a wild 5 years. It's just one of those things that you kind of put your head down, you keep on trucking, you keep that, his spirit alive by obviously thinking about him and talking about him as much as possible. But man, to think that 5 years has already gone by is just, it's just kind of nuts. And it never is something, people always say that things get better over time, or time heals all and all that. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It's, just as painful today as it was that day. You just start thinking about everything from, the phone call that you got, the sound that, of his mom's voice on the phone talking about his passing. It's just unbelievable. It's one of those things you never think is going to happen to you. And why would you, right? Of course, you don't want that to happen. But I try to spend a lot of my time thinking about, all the greatness that he had and all the laughs that he provided. And man, that dude was a character. That was one absolute character. It's so funny. I never knew when I got older in life why my mom would call me or text me sometimes and be like, I was just thinking about when you did this. Remember when you did this when you were a kid? And I was like, what the hell made you think of that, right? Randomly. And now I get it. Now I totally get it. So, whenever you get an opportunity to, hug your kid around their neck and give them a kiss, give them a big hug and tell them how much you love them, do it, because you never know when it's going to be the last time. So today, officially, I know I've been talking about him all week long, and maybe that's just because, again, I've been thinking about him so much all year long since it turned 2025, just because, again, it's the month of January, and I always start thinking, oh, boy, here comes that date, and how am I going to react to it? Maybe that's the reason why. I don't know, but maybe because it was a holiday on Monday. I don't have any idea, and I guess I really don't need to have an explanation, but shout out to my son, Kimani, who, passed away 5 years ago today. I did want to go ahead and jump into some Raider news, a little news and notes here, a couple of nuggets that I like to call it here in segment number 1. Off top, I didn't talk about this on Monday, but Raiders Brock Bowers, the tight end, tight end, was named to the PFWA Writers All-NFL team. Is the only rookie in 2024 and the first rookie to earn the honor since Sauce Gardner did in 2022. The first rookie tight end to make the All-NFL team since Keith Jackson in 1988. And matter of fact, not only did Brock Bowers make the All-Rookie team for PFWA, he also, JPJ, the Jackson Powers Johnson, he made it for guard as well. So Bowers and JPJ both made the All-Rookie team for PFWA, and Brock Bowers was named to the PFWA All-NFL team. So the honors continue to roll in for one Brock Bowers. And why wouldn't they, right? I mean, the dude had a phenomenal rookie year, someone to build around forever, who the next head coach and new staff is that's going to come in to the Silver and Black in 2025. Speaking of whoever the next head coach is going to be, who is it going to be? And where's the sense of urgency? How quickly do they need to identify their guy? Ben Johnson, officially a Bear. Mike Vrabel, officially a Patriot. Aaron Glenn, there's no deal in place, but he spent a lot of time with the Jets on Tuesday. Him and Lance Newmark both expected to agree to deals with the Jets, but he did leave the facility with no deal. Apparently, according to my guy Jordan Schultz from Fox Sports, he said that there was a substantial offer made, and Aaron Glenn is still kind of weighing his options. He's supposed to meet with the Saints later on this week. So Aaron Glenn is the guy that the Raiders met with, but looks like he's going to be off to either the Jets or the Saints. Steve Spagnuolo, who's still the Chiefs defensive coordinator, he's an option. Pete Carroll, we've highlighted him quite a bit. He's an option. Vance Joseph, the Broncos defensive coordinator, an option. Ron Rivera came in late last week to meet with the Raiders. He's an option. Robert Saleh is also an option. He's still out there. Todd Monken, the offensive coordinator from the Ravens, no word yet on him. They have requested an interview with him, but there's no conversation piece on if he's actually going to have an interview with the Raiders or not. There's also some other guys out there like Liam Cohen, who looks like he's going to be going to the Jags. He's the current Tampa Bay Buccaneers OC, but there's been no request from the Raiders to interview him yet. Maybe that changes if they do hire John Spytek to be the GM. He's the assistant GM in Tampa Bay, so maybe Liam Cohen would go with him, but it sounds like he's the leader in the clubhouse for the Jags job. Mike McCarthy, he sounds like he could be in play for the Saints, but no request from the Raiders. Cliff Kingsbury, that's a name that could be floated out there. He's killing it with the Commanders right now. They're one game away from the Super Bowl. No requests by the Raiders as of yet. So there's some names out there that are available, but to me, something has to happen pretty quickly. Something needs to happen. The Raiders interviewed many different people, which is a good thing. They cast a wide net, but at some point, these jobs are going to start to fill, and then all of a sudden you're going to get stuck. And you're going to get stuck without the guy that you may want. Obviously, option A was Ben Johnson. Didn't get him. Option B, from everything I understood, was Pete Carroll, but there's been no conversation of a follow-up interview or whatever, or negotiations with Pete Carroll, so kind of wait and see there. And then I never knew who Plan C was, right? I heard Todd Monken was the guy they were interested in, but he hasn't even, as far as I know, confirmed an interview yet with the Raiders. So what direction are they going to go? I'm not too sure. I like Pete Carroll. I think that he would be a good option at this stage of the game. I would love to see a Pete Carroll and Robert Saleh head coach and DC combination. And then if Pete Carroll at some point, 3-4 years down the road, decides that he wants to hang it up and retire, pass the sticks on to Robert Saleh and let him be the head football coach. And obviously, if everything goes right and he's there 3 or 4 years, the Raiders have probably won a lot of games and everything could just kind of continue on and pass the sticks on and things run smoothly. But again, they've got to be able to hire the guys first. So that would be my options right there. Obviously, there's other options, but we'll see what direction they go in. I just think that something needs to happen pretty quickly before everything starts to get wrapped up and all these jobs start to get filled. Then you're on the outside looking in wondering, well, what do you do now? Because the guy you were expecting to get hired is now hired to be a head coach somewhere else. So they've got their work cut out for him. But coming up in segment number 2, I want you to hear about Robert Saleh. He's a guy who interviewed in person late last week with the Raiders. He's a guy that I've always considered to be a defensive coordinator, but after doing a little bit of research on Tuesday on my radio show, talking to some folks from the Jets, talking to some folks from the 49ers, maybe reconsidering how you feel about Robert Saleh as a potential head coach. You'll hear about him coming up in segment number 2 with today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keep every game exciting. And when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. And there's only a couple weeks left, right? There's one weekend full of games to determine who's going to go to the Super Bowl. And then there's the big game, the Super Bowl, on February 9th. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. Get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to let you hear some sounds on potential head coach Robert Saleh, a guy that the Raiders have interviewed. They interviewed him and Ron Rivera late in the week. Last week, I'll try to do a little bit of a preview or a little bit of a, kind of research on who Ron Rivera could potentially be as a head coach. Obviously, he had a lot of success in Carolina, got them to Super Bowl 50. They lost that one. Didn't have a ton of success in Washington, but then again, he was also dealing with a Daniel Snyder led team. That was the ownership there that obviously was a big time mess, and even Commander fans didn't want to be Commander fans with Daniel Snyder there. So the Raiders have interviewed plenty of people, from Ben Johnson to Aaron Glenn to Steve Spagnuolo, Pete Carroll, Vance Joseph, Ron Rivera, Robert Saleh. There's other guys like Liam Cohen. I mentioned that in segment number 1, Mike McCarthy, Cliff Kingsbury, that have not interviewed or even been requested, or even like Todd Monken, who has not confirmed an interview yet with the Silver and Black. My options, as I mentioned, Pete Carroll, head coach, Robert Saleh, associate head coach, assistant head coach, defensive coordinator. That would be great. A couple more real quick that I'll throw out there that are just, bouncing off the wall, kind of maybe the surprise interview or the surprise candidate that has not even been interviewed and has not been requested. None of that. How about Marcus Freeman, the Notre Dame head coach? Right, he would be an outside-the-box hire, right? Young dude, could build with the team, 39 years old, just turned 39, and obviously just had Notre Dame in the national championship. Now, I like Marcus Freeman to stay at Notre Dame, but he's also a coach that I like a lot. I liked a lot when he was the defensive coordinator there at the University of Cincinnati. So Marcus Freeman would be one. And then I'll just throw this one out there just for the hell of it. Why not? Deion Sanders, primetime. Now, it would just be must-see TV. I'm going to tell you straight up. I'm not saying that he would go and be a head coach in the National Football League and have a ton of success, and obviously that's what the Raiders want. But it would be must-see TV, right? As much as I tuned in to see what was going on in Colorado, and the rest of the world did too, watching college football or watching Colorado play, I mean, everyone would have all eyes on the Raiders. Again, I'm not saying it would be successful, not even saying that I'd want that, but I'm just throwing it out there as a third candidate if they're trying to look for off-the-wall candidates. But really, in all, being serious, Pete Carroll, Robert Saleh, that would be my first two guys as far as the head coach of Pete Carroll and defensive coordinator Robert Saleh. But Robert Saleh is now interviewing with the Jaguars for a second time for the head coaching job. That's coming up on Friday. He's very much in the mix to be a head coach. And if he's not, he probably is going to go back to the 49ers as their defensive coordinator. But he does have familiarity with Pete Carroll, so maybe he'd be up for that DC job. But just focusing in on him as a head coach, I reached out to a couple different people on Tuesday, had him on my radio show. And the first one was Anton Staley from the New York Daily News. He covers the Jets like a glove and knows all things about Robert Saleh. We just started talking about Robert Saleh, the head coach before Aaron Rodgers. So here's a couple quick minutes with Anton Staley talking about Robert Saleh, the head coach.
Well, don't believe anything he says about injuries. That's the first and foremost thing I would say about Robert Saleh, to be completely honest with you. But all joking aside, I mean, you heard it, like he has this all gas, no brakes mantra that, he uses quite regularly when players have really adopted that. I think the defensive scheme really improved even before Aaron got there from 2021 to 22. 21, they were the worst defense as far as points allowed and yards allowed per game. 22, they ended up, finishing fifth in both of those categories there and really helped turn that defense around, him and Jeff Albrecht. So I definitely think he tried to set a culture of, hard-nosed football there, trying to stop the run and, hoping that hoping the offense will be good enough to win games. Obviously, whether it was Zach Wilson or even Aaron Rodgers, that didn't happen, didn't come to fruition. And, I think Woody Johnson really rushed firing him after a 2-3 start and really, unraveled the whole season, to be honest with you. And I think that's why you're seeing teams like the Raiders and the Jacksonville Jaguars wanting to interview Robert Saleh, because everything just completely fell apart after he got fired.
how did things change once Aaron Rodgers arrived? Like, how did that change who Robert Saleh appeared to be as the head coach?
Well, the expectations change, and then now also you got another voice in the building, somebody that has a lot more experience in the NFL than you. So I definitely think that, you kind of, they were fine. They had a friendly relationship. I don't think it was kind of any egos there, but you kind of see things start to turn, unravel in a different direction, especially when Aaron missed mandatory minicamp and was fined because of it. So I don't think necessarily Aaron liked that. I know Robert didn't want to do it, but you have to, set the precedent, with the rest of the team there. And then from that point on, some people just didn't think Aaron Rodgers was a leader. And now you got a guy in Robert Saleh who's, again, like on his first job, trying to, coordinate who the leaders are and also, keep a, hard-nosed, locker room at the same time. So I definitely think, it changed the dynamic of the team, especially with the expectations. I don't think Robert actually thought the expectations would be that high when Aaron Rodgers came in the building, but of course they changed everything. The Jets went from a team that was a bit of an afterthought into, now they are a team that's in the limelight, just getting their prominence that a lot of people thought they're going to take the next step and, contend in the AFC and possibly challenge for a Super Bowl, and obviously that didn't happen.
So just a couple minutes, and it's so hard for me to determine who Robert Saleh is as a head coach based off what we saw with the Jets, because there was pre-Aaron Rodgers and then there was during Aaron Rodgers, the run there. And it just didn't seem like, even watching Hard Knocks briefly, I'm not really a Hard Knocks guy, but just seeing some clips from it when Aaron Rodgers arrived, it just seemed like everyone was rolling out the red carpet to Aaron Rodgers like, hey, whatever you want us to do, we'll do. You want us to jump? Just tell us how high. Like, it didn't seem like they had any kind of institutional control, any type of, control of the organization once Aaron Rodgers got there. It just seemed like it was do as he says and don't worry about anything else. And so I don't really know how neutered, Robert Saleh was as the head coach. So I can't really tell if he could be good in that role. So I also reached out to Brian Peacock from Locked On 49ers. He does a fantastic job with that show, covering the 49ers like a glove, and just asked him, started out the conversation. We talked a little bit longer about Robert Saleh, and we talked about Pete Carroll and some others as well. But here's just a little bit of our conversation about Robert Saleh, starting off asking if he could be a good head coach, or is he just a guy that he would look at as a good defensive coordinator?
I think he is head coach material. I think he's a really smart guy. I think he's well-respected around the league, well-respected by everybody he's been around. I think he has a very good grasp of what he wants to do on the field, on defense. I think it's very interesting that he allowed Jeff Ulbrich to start calling the plays with the New York Jets because he wanted to have a bigger role as the figurehead of the franchise in running the New York Jets, and now it didn't end up working. Maybe he needed to continue to call the plays there. Jeff Ulbrich got himself a DC job with the Atlanta Falcons, so clearly that staff is well thought of around the NFL, and I find it fascinating that Robert Saleh interviewed for just about every head coach opening in the NFL, and I would say the biggest thing you never know if someone is a truly great head coach, even if they are a very good coordinator, and there's plenty of coaches in the league. There's evidence that they're more of a coordinator and not that great of a head coach. But with Robert Saleh, clearly the energy, that was we talked about in that opening clip there. His energy is something the 49ers have absolutely missed, and you feel a lack of that energy the last 2 years without him or without DeMeco Ryans on the sideline. It's been different for the San Francisco 49ers, and I think they not only want his X's and O's back, but they want that energy back. I think it's really important for that team, and I think that's something he brought to the Jets. You saw how good those Jets defenses were before things got pretty weird there toward the end, and I think he would be a really nice candidate, and I would have no problem with my team hiring him as a head coach. And generally, I do think guys do a lot better job their second time around as a head coach than their first time around.
How quickly did you identify Robert Saleh as, okay, yeah, he's going to be a head coach in this league sooner rather than later?
I think it certainly wasn't right away, because the 49ers in 2017, when Robert Saleh was hired as defensive coordinator, he was not a well-known name, and some people were skeptical, and the 49ers roster was awful, and that team was bad for a little while. And so until all of a sudden they went from the number 2 pick in the draft to the Super Bowl in 2019, A lot of people were saying maybe this guy should be fired, let alone become a head coach in the NFL somewhere. But then after the next couple of years, and you saw how that defense changed, and the way this is what I like about Robert Saleh, and I like that he came through this and it was sort of iron sharpens iron with Kyle Shanahan and all the great coaches that were on that staff, and numerous head coaches now around the NFL that were on that staff the first few years with the 49ers in 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. The scheme changed. And when Robert Saleh showed up in San Francisco, it was that Gus Bradley, which is kind of where he cut his teeth on the Seattle Seahawks defenses as a linebacker coach, and it was that cover three. And the league kind of figured out that cover three defense, and it was a little bit harder for a lot of teams that didn't have the talent that the Legion of Boom teams had on the back end to continually run really vanilla coverages. And so the 49ers started to get beat a little bit with those coverages over and over again. So they started to incorporate less cover three, and they still play a lot of cover three, but a little bit more man concepts, a little bit more two high safeties, a lot more cover four, and sort of disguising things, and then sort of bringing pressure and overload. And just the way it evolved was, I thought, really cool about Robert Saleh and his defense, that not only did he have a good plan, but he was able to change his plan, make it multiple, and have it evolve every single year, and I think that's a really good sign of the coach.
If he doesn't get a head coaching job, whether it's with the Cowboys, the Jaguars, the Raiders, do you think that it's inevitable that he returns to the 49ers as their defensive coordinator?
Absolutely. I'm kind of blown away. The 49ers haven't interviewed anybody. They interviewed Robert Saleh. They interviewed one in-house candidate in Brandon Staley, and they interviewed Lions assistant defensive coach Deshae Townsend, former NFL defensive back. They've interviewed three people. They didn't interview Dennis Allen or Lou Anarumo or any of these guys. And so that tells me they either know something that we don't about expecting that Robert Saleh is not going to get one of these many jobs that he's interviewed for. And he is one of the finalists for the Jags job. And he's going to go interview for that one on Friday. It sounds like maybe Liam Cohen is the leader in the clubhouse there for that job in Jacksonville. But either Kyle Shanahan is so confident that Robert Saleh is not going to get the head coach job somewhere and he's going to be the 49ers' next defense coordinator, or he's not worried about it because he likes Brandon Staley that much, because he hasn't interviewed anybody. And that's been somewhat fascinating, because the big thing from Kyle Shanahan after firing Nick Sorensen this offseason, he basically said that this was such a great hiring period and so many good candidates for defensive coordinator that he didn't have the opportunity to hire. So maybe he was just talking about one guy, and that one guy was Robert Saleh being available.
Brian Peacock from Locked On 49ers right there. Join my radio show, Unnecessary Roughness, on Raider Nation Radio 920 on Tuesday, such as Anton Staley. Antoine Staley did as well from the New York Daily News to talk all things Robert Saleh. And you heard what he said. He thought and thinks that he could be a really good head coach. And obviously he's a really good defensive coordinator. But you also hear what he has to say about if he doesn't get a head coaching job, then they feel really confident there in the Bay. The 49ers feel really confident. Kyle Shanahan feels really confident that he'll be back as a defensive coordinator. And so that shouldn't be a big surprise. Obviously, he'd be going back to a place that he's very familiar with instead of having to try to start over as a DC, like with the Raiders or any other team. But again, I would be all in on him being the defensive coordinator if they can convince him to, like I said, an associate head coaching job, like the assistant, the right-hand man to Pete Carroll, and then maybe he could take over when Pete Carroll is done with what he's done and ready to walk off and go and retire. Maybe that could be a situation. I just think that the full court press needs to be on Pete Carroll and probably somebody that has experience already as a head coach, just because they know what it looks like and sounds like. Now, if they decide to reach out to a guy like Liam Cohen, maybe if Spytek does get the job as the GM, then that's another conversation. I know he's a guy that's got a lot of respect around the league, and people are really looking at him, even though he looks like he's going to be the Jaguars' next head coach. So we'll see how it goes. But that was a little bit of a behind the scenes on Robert Saleh, who again interviewed with the Raiders for their head coaching job late last week. Coming up in segment number 3, your calls and texts. What's on your mind? What direction do you think the Silver and Black should go? 707-654-4693. Before we get to that, though, I do want to tell you about another great sponsor here on the show, and that is Talkspace. Therapy, it's a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule could be a challenge. That's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace, the leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours, and it's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans, and for the most insurance members, and for most insured members, there's a zero copay. It's never been easier to prioritize mental health. As a listener of this podcast, the Locked On Raiders podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the promo code SPACE80, space the number 80. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL. Enter the promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL. Promo code SPACE, the number 8 and number 0. Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL, promo code SPACE80. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Let's start things off with a call from Mark from Utah. He's calling to talk about the head coaching search for the Raiders and takes a look at the AFC West and the other head coaches in the division. Here he is, Mark from Utah.
Hey, Q, this is Mark from Utah. I have texted in before to your show but never called. Just thought I'd finally make a call. First of all, love your show. I listen to it every single day. Haven't missed a show in a couple of years. I just want to comment on the coaching search for the Raiders. If you look at the AFC West, Sean Payton won a Super Bowl with the Saints, has coached with the Saints and the Broncos. Jim Harbaugh went to a Super Bowl with the 49ers, lost by 3 to his brother, has coached with the Chargers and the 49ers, and also won a national championship at Michigan. Andy Reid, well, we know about him. He's been with the Eagles, been with the Chiefs, been to Super Bowls for both franchises, won several. Pete Carroll is the guy for me. He's coached the Jets, Patriots, and Seahawks. He's won a national championship at USC. It's the only division in football where you have everybody in the division has been to a Super Bowl and coached at multiple places. Even in the AFC North, you got Mike Tomlin, John Harbaugh. Those guys have been to the Super Bowl, won the Super Bowl, but they've been in one place. Pete Carroll's seen it all. That is my point. I think Pete Carroll has seen everything. And the last thing I want to mention, we don't know if Ben Johnson would have been a good head coach. He's a great coordinator. So is Josh McDaniels. We just don't know if he'd have been a good head coach. I like the idea of going with somebody with experience. And anyway, just love your show, Q. Talk to you later, and I'm out. Bye.
Mark, thanks so much for the call. Appreciate you. And yeah, to me, Pete Carroll makes sense. You know, I've had a lot of pushback because of his age. I don't think that matters, man. He's more energetic than I am. He's more energetic than most people I know, right? At 73 going on 74, he's got more energy than probably all of us combined. So I'm not worried about that. He was already the number 2 guy. I know that for a fact. It was Ben Johnson, Pete Carroll, and that's really all I know. I don't know if there was a number 3. So go with the plan B, right? And he's an experienced guy. He's been there, done that, knows what it looks like, knows what it sounds like. I'm sure he can find a way to get things turned around and get that culture where it needs to be and put the plan in place to really get the Raiders back to being in, you know, a good position, especially in a division with a tough coaches. And he's been there, done that. And he's beaten those guys, right? He doesn't necessarily have a winning record against all of them, but he's beaten those guys. So he knows what it takes to get it done. So Mark, thanks so much for the call. Appreciate you. Up next, got a text from Raider Jason in the 304. Said, good day, Q. Raider Jason from the 304. First, I want to acknowledge you honoring your son's memory. I hope you and your family have a good day. Starting to change my opinion on the Tom Brady effect on the service. It looks like there's a different vibe during this coaching search. Here's my short list for head coaches. 1, Pete Carroll. 2, Bruce Arians. Don't think he's even in the mix. 3, Doug Peterson. Don't think he's in the mix either. These guys are proven head coaches. I realize Ben Johnson was the hot commodity right now, but I think we've dodged a bullet here. They tried They tried the rookie head coach twice in a few years. They have to get it right this time around. This constant carousel has to end. As always, love the show. Just win, baby. Go Raiders. That's from Raider Jason in the 304. And, yeah, thanks for the shout out to my son, Kimani. Definitely appreciate that and appreciate everyone who's reached out. And there's been a ton of people reaching out by way of the YouTube page and the comment section. It's awesome. Ari passed a lot of those messages along to me, so thank you for that. A lot of people that know me personally have reached out, calls, texts, everything, tweets. Really do appreciate it. It means a lot. Pete Carroll is fantastic. I think that he should be number 1 at this stage of the game. Bruce Arians, I was all about him. I don't think he's in the mix, just like Doug Peterson. But Doug Peterson could be a really good offensive coordinator. He's got familiarity with Pete Carroll. They run in the same world, right? So I could see, and I think he'd be a really good OC. So I'd be okay with that. You bring in Pete Carroll, you bring in Doug Peterson as the OC, and Robert Saleh, if you could find a way to get him to be the defensive coordinator, that'd be a hell of a staff, or at least starting to the staff, as far as I'm concerned. I don't know if the Raiders dodged a bullet with not getting Ben Johnson. I saw that article floating around social media. I think that's quick, reaction. I think that's kind of like fans that say, "Oh, we didn't want him anyway." Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. Right. So I don't know. He might be a good head coach. He might not. Who knows? But he ultimately chose Chicago. So the Raiders move on. Like I said on Monday, I'm just glad that everything, and I said on Tuesday as well, I'm just glad everything happened quickly so the Raiders could pivot and still get a quality coach like a Pete Carroll. So thanks so much for that text. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a call from Raider Too Much. He's calling to talk about the Raiders head coaching job and what to do after Ben Johnson. And, well, he's not quite sure. Here he is, Raider Too Much.
Yo, Q, what up? It's Raider Too Much, man. Just calling, if it does air, shout out to Kimani, man. Thanks for being a Raider with us, bro. I don't know what we're going to do, man. I really thought Ben Johnson was a dude. I was buying into Brady. If you bring us a ring, we'll love you forever. Everything forgiven. I'm mad about AP, that Pete Carroll, man. I don't know, man. What we going to do, man? When is it our time? And these refs and the Chiefs. Come on, man. How long are they going to play in our face like this? All right. Okay. You got it. You got it. Just give them the three-peat, let it get on out of the way, and I don't want to see him again. But it's time to pull ourselves up, man. We got to get out of this hole. Give me one, bro. Give me one in my lifetime. I'm feeling like it's never going to happen anyways, man. Shout out Kimani. Shout out Raider Nation. Shout out Q. Love what you do. Love what you're doing, man. Keep doing it, man. Peace out, Nation.
Too much. Thanks for the call. Appreciate you. Thanks for the kind words as well about my son. That's much appreciated. And, there's definitely a good question of what's next and when does the turnaround happen for the Raiders. And honestly, I think the when does the turnaround happen for the Raiders is the bigger question, right? It's been so long. And so long that, there's people that have been fans of this team and have never seen them be really successful. I mean, last time they were in the Super Bowl, Kimani was a very young dude, right? He was born in 99. They were in the Super Bowl in 2003, right? And my youngest son, was he born yet? Yeah, I think he was just born, right? He wasn't even super old. Little Q wasn't even like a year at that stage of the game. Like he was a young dude. So, it's wild, right? And for the longest, they both trusted that, hey, my dad knows what he's talking about. This team is going to be a really good team. And unfortunately, Kimani never got to see him be a really good team. And little Q, he's still waiting. He's still waiting. Like, Dad, are they gonna get it done? All right, I'll wait. But I'm sure his patience is kind of running thin as well. Good thing he's a basketball player and he's focused on his hoops instead of focused on NFL action. But thanks so much for that, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what direction they go as far as next with the head coach and obviously the staff that they put together and who the GM's going to be as well. So thanks so much for the call. Appreciate you. Up next, got a text from Professor Raider in Boston. Q, if I'm reading the tea leaves and not so cryptic tweet from AFL Godfather, seems like Pete Carroll is going to be the next head coach for the Raiders, and I'm not mad at it. If you reflect on how inexperienced Pierce was and how the AFC West coaches were playing chess while he was playing checkers, it seems like we would have someone with some skins on the wall. Let's get a QB, and I think we'll be cooking with grease. Thanks again for being vulnerable and talking about the death of your son. Much love to you. Just win. Professor Raiders from Boston. Thanks so much for the text. And, I think that the experience does matter. It really does, and as much as I was on board with Ben Johnson, if he did get the job, I think at the end of the day, the experience probably does weigh heavily. And I know a lot of people, like I said, look at Pete Carroll and talk about his age. I don't worry about his age. He's got plenty of energy, and if he lasts 3, 4, 5 years with the Raiders, when's the last coach that lasted 3, 4, 5 years with the Raiders, right? I mean, that would be a win right there in itself. And if that happened, most likely he's winning some games as well. So thanks so much for that text. I do appreciate you. It's always good to read the tweets from AFL Godfather. He always tells you just enough, but doesn't tell me the ultimate answer. Who is he? I still don't know. All these years being here in Vegas, obviously he works for the Raiders in the building. He's taking pictures everywhere with the Raiders on the road, at the facility. He's got them all. And I'm sure that he knows me well. He sent me a couple DMs on Twitter before, but I still do not know to this day who that is. As funny as that is, believe it or not, I still don't know who AFL Godfather really is. But thanks so much for the text. I do appreciate it. We'll close out with a call from Blue Collar Raider Omar from the 408. That's a mouthful, right? Blue Collar Raider Omar from the 408. He's calling to talk about an idea that he sounds a little bit wild, but he has reasoning for it. Here he is, Blue Collar Raider Omar out the 408.
Hey, Q, this is your boy, Blue Collar Raider Omar, calling out of the 408. Hear me out on this. I know you feel like this ship has sailed, but how about we get Pete Carroll as a head coach and get John Gruden as the OC? Now, hear me out. You're probably thinking Gruden will not come back as an OC, but if he sees a window to get back to work, because he loves football, he's been going to different training camps like the Saints and whatnot, trying to coach up different quarterbacks. If he gets back in with the Raiders, first of all, we're still paying him anyway, or we're already paying him, so probably adjust that contract. And Pete Carroll's he's about to be 74 years old, so he'll gradually get moved back in. And those emails is about 3 years ago. I feel like people is over those emails. He's showing up on social media all over the place. So don't shoot it down. Think about it, Q. Think about it. You know what I mean? And I hope I hear about it on the podcast. All right, I'm out.
Thank you so much for the call, my man. And look, I see a way that John Gruden could return as a head coach. I do. And obviously, Mark Davis and John Gruden have a tight relationship. Mark Davis never wanted to let him go. So I could even see John Gruden return as a head coach. I cannot see him return as an offensive coordinator, especially for the Raiders. Could you imagine? Just think about this. Think about this scenario. Say Pete Carroll got the job and John Gruden's the offensive coordinator. Could you see Pete trying to run training camp or practice in a way that he knows how to get it done? And then all of a sudden, Gruden, you hear his voice out of nowhere say, hey, Pete, hey, man, that might work with the Seahawks. That might work at USC, but we're the Raiders. We are the bleepity Raiders. We don't do stuff like that. Take that back to Seattle. Can you imagine that? And you know what Gruden's personality, that was a terrible Gruden impersonation, by the way. But you know with his personality, that's what he would do. He would say something like, I got a lot of respect for John Gruden. I think that the majority of people are past the whole email situation. It's obviously a new day and age. I don't think that people are really worried about it at this stage of the game. Seems like he's been getting back in good graces with the NFL, just with, some of the participation that he's had at different teams, organizations like you've pointed out. Obviously, he's working with Barstool. He's just kind of very busy over social media, had the YouTube page. Like, he's obviously very active, wants to be coaching again. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I can't see him being an offensive coordinator. Certain guys that you just realize at a certain stage of the game, they're a head coach or nothing. I think John Gruden is that. He's a head coach. I kind of want to see it, just to hear him say exactly what I said. Hey, Pete, we don't do that over here. Take that to Seattle. We're the Raiders. We are the Raiders. We wear silver and black. We don't wear, what's that, fluorescent green? Get that out of here, Pete. Like, I can take that back to USC. Like, again, terrible impersonation, John Gruden. I got to work on that. But I can hear him saying that, and maybe I would sign up for that just because of that. But in all seriousness, I just can't see him being anyone's offensive coordinator. So thanks so much for that. I do appreciate it. Maybe president of football operations, maybe that'd be, somewhere that he'd go. But given the track record with the draft, probably not the direction you want to go either. So there's that. But thanks again, like I said, for the call, man. It's always great to hear from you. And that's all I got time for on today's show. Still got a text from Slickback Raider, a call from Raider X. We got a few other texts that we'll get to and calls. Obviously, we'll have more news and notes coming up tomorrow, and we'll do some more conversation piece. And maybe we'll do a little bit of a deep dive on Ron Rivera, who potentially could be the Raiders' next head coach, a guy they interviewed late last week. So until tomorrow, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.